Hello, my name is Bench. I'm the UX designer for Schine, and I was also the lead for our Rails update that just came out. So the Rails update really came out of a lot of feedback that we got from the trailer. A lot of people saw the ship that was on the elevator and went, how can I actually build that? We were saying all this was built in the game, and while that is so, it was a really complicated system that we had to use, either using multiple players controlling the different parts or using push beams like we've seen in other videos of some of the earlier elevator designs to be able to push carts around. But with things like collision detection, it made it a lot more impractical to be able to build like that. So a lot of people were keen to be able to build these mechanical sort of structures within their ships and their stations, and in order to do that we needed a more robust system, a system actually thought out. So that came out of a trailer, and we actually started talking, alright, how can we actually build this into the game? Talking with Schine, he already had ideas for the docking overhaul that was coming up, and so we realized a lot of the functions and things that would be built into that new docking system would actually be quite applicable to Rails as well. Things like the new collision detection, so that we'd able to have flush sort of seams on our wedges and stuff. So it made sense to be able to bundle them all together and actually use docking as the basis for the actual Rails system. So the way that Rails ended up coming out, it was our new docking system, and then just adding more onto it, you could easily suddenly make things move. It was great. So we talked through a lot of stuff, and then from there I went away and put together a proof of concept, basically just 2D flat things, saying, alright, well, what sort of blocks would we need for this? The fear is always going to add too many blocks to the game, and then it just becomes impractical for people to even use the system. But we needed to still make it usable within the world that we'd created with the rest of the blocks, but also have that flexibility as well. So the initial concept we put together looked at how can we achieve 3D movement, how can we achieve rotation, what sort of blocks we might actually need. It was very sort of a way that we could visualize what we wanted to do, because this wasn't something that we had added to the game before, movement and rotation, and we looked at other voxel games and how they approached movement and rotation, if they even were able to do that at all, and went, alright, well, what's the easiest, most simple way that we can do this? Obviously, working off docking, it meant that we could define our entities very easily, so it did let us kind of be able to set, alright, well, this is our starting ground, and where do we go from there? So we ended up doing a second, more polished proof of concept, which took a couple of days to put together, that really visualized, all right, well, what would these individual blocks look like? How would you use them in tandem? And more specifically, how can we start making this be able to be used in a practical way? We knew we'd need new logic blocks to be able to support it, because just thinking about the logic that you'd need otherwise, it was really unfathomable how complicated it could get if you wanted to do more and more complex movement. So this really looked at, alright, well, we're going to have to add some new blocks into the game. Two major things that came up from our conversations were we were going to have to add in wireless logic between entities. That was just something that we were going to have to do in order for this to work, because if you want to look at just building a simple elevator, your buttons go into your actual elevator cabin or carriage. It needs to travel with that entity, but all the controls and all the logic to drive your actual elevator need to be on the entity that it's docked to. So we realized that we're going to have to add in these new logic blocks. So suddenly we're looking at overhaul for the docking, collision overhaul, as well as overhaul of how we handle logic, because up until that time it wasn't really practical being able to send that sort of data between entities just yet. So it meant that we had to rework a lot of stuff, which is why it took so long. We went through a couple of different concepts, looking at what we needed to do and what we needed to add in, and then just gave us our list of, alright, in theory, these are the blocks that we need, and these are the ways that we interact. There's a lot of logic interactions with our Rails system, from swapping blocks to detecting when an entity is over Rails and everything in between. So we had to define clearly, alright, these are the ways that you interact. When it's next to this block, this happens. When it's not next to this block, this happens. And it did take some time and bug fixing, really sorting out just the mechanics of it. So there was a lot of testing, a lot of people who tested it once we actually started getting the actual pieces in. And from there we did some initial designs and worked out, all right, well, this isn't working, this is working, what do we need to do? So there were changes from what our initial concepts were to what ended up in the game. So you gotta try those things out, because what you've talked about for so long and worked on, when you realize that might not actually be the best way to do it, you need to go back and go, all right, well, let's do it this way, but what ramifications does this have? So, but everyone's picked it up really quick. When we did the release finally, I was very happy with where we were at. But even before we had released, the stuff that people were creating with Rails was more, it was just way bigger than what I even thought they'd be achieving in such a short time. We've got robots, we've got mechanized hands, we've got escalators, we've got big spidery legs, and all kinds of crazy stuff that people are creating. And I had no idea people would pick it up this fast. So it's really exciting to see all that come together and what people have been able to create in such a short space of time. We're really scratching the surface with what we can do, especially as we go forward and add more and more stuff into the game. I just can't wait to see what people will have built and look back in a year's time from when we released this update and go, that was where we started and look what it is now. Which is always how the game's going. I mean, looking back at where it's come from to where it is now, there's so much more in the game, it's so much more polished, and it's not overly complicated, but it's complicated enough, and there's enough that you can do that it keeps you engaged with trying to build something that a little bit better. My job is very much about looking at the whole gameplay aspect and how can players get the most enriching, most deep gaming experience out of Starmade. And so things like this rail update really add new mechanics and something new to try in there with building, but I'm looking forward to seeing how it applies to other aspects of the game as we add them in, which is really exciting. So I hope you all enjoy our rail update. There's a little bit of an insight into the process that went into actually putting it all together. Obviously stay tuned for more, and I'll see you next time.